New year, new you. But what if we decided to try something that's considered old? In a time where technology is so perfected, resolution is perfectly sharp, colors are entirely perfectly accurate, sometimes we forget the classics and some of the things that inspire us to get into this in the first place. I spent a little bit of time away from a craft that I once knew very well, but instead of chasing the next trend, I decided to move a little bit back and go with what works. The shots you're looking at right now is the not so new and often not talked about Fuji GFX 50r. Now there's a ton of medium format Fuji cameras available, but instead of moving forward and also emptying out my bank account, I decided to take a step back and look at one of the classics and figure out what brings people to the GFX system in general. And the only way to do that is to try to find it at the source. You know who I kind of look like? I look like one of the robbers from Home Alone 1 just before getting to Macaulay Culkin's house and then absolutely embarrassing myself. What's going on, guys? Welcome to 2025, and as any New Year's tradition, well, we're going to talk about a camera that's not a Sony for a little bit, which shocks the world, but no, I'm not switching anything. Today we're going to be talking about the Fuji GFX 50r, which is a camera that's almost 8 years old, which might beg the question, why the heck did I do this in the first place? But, well, we'll get to it. Now, as far as disclosures go, Fuji didn't send me this camera. I've actually bummed the 100 Mark II off of them pretty much throughout 2024, and I never made a video about it, and I feel kind of bad about that, so I decided to buy this instead. But the today's sponsor is actually going to be Angelbird, because they've given me a whole bunch of cards throughout my career. Again, didn't make a whole video about them except for that one with the CF Express Type A card, but it got a lot better, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, why did I buy this almost 8-year-old camera? People are still complaining about the Sony FX3 not getting an update after 3 years, and I decided to buy a medium format camera that's 8 years old. Well, for one, it's gonna be, honestly, the aesthetic. The camera looks really cool in my hand, and I like shooting with it, and when you have a camera that does the things you want and it looks cool, you're probably more likely to use it. The 50R is a rangefinder style of camera, and not many of the GFX camera have this type of body design. In fact, the 50S, the 50S2, the 100S, the 100S2, of all the modern day Fujis all kind of look exactly the same, where this one is a little bit different. So having that rangefinder style is nice, and it does feel like an everyday carry, albeit it's much bigger than the other everyday carry, the X100 Mark VI. But that goes into the second thing, and mine is going to be ergonomics. I have gigantic hands, and I can't beat the comments and the allegations that I have tennis rackets for hands. And typically for me when I'm using a photo camera, which is a little bit different from video, is that if the camera doesn't pass the pinky test, if I don't do this, and I could hold on the camera, I'm much less likely to use it. Now, it's a little bit different when I'm using something for video, for example, the FX3 or the Lumix S9 or the S5 IIX, because when I'm holding my camera and recording video, I hold in a different way where this kind of pinky thing or even my ring finger isn't necessarily that big of a factor. But when I'm doing things like run and gun photo or just photography in general, I kind of like having my hands like this. Look at this. It fits so nice. Also, I'm not sure if you're not familiar with the photography to cinematography pipeline, but most people that started in video production started in photography as well. And I'm no exception. I used to work with billion-dollar athleisure companies and magazines and different clients, and all over the place I was doing photography as well. And for most of 2024, I actually used the GFX 100 Mark II from Fuji that I borrowed from them for a few months, and I just never made a video about it, which it's kind of my bad, and I don't feel bad that they haven't let me borrow it again. So I decided to buy my own. Now, Fuji GFX cameras are what you would call medium format, but not necessarily like a true medium format. It's about 0.79 full frame. So you're actually gonna have a lower number in terms of your focal length when you're comparing it to a full frame equivalent. For example, my 50mm is kind of more like a 40mm when we're adapting it to a GFX sensor, which is exactly the opposite of when you do it for Super 35, where it becomes a little bit longer. Now, I'm not here to say that medium format is the end-all be-all, but you do notice a couple of subtleties in terms of the depth. In terms of using higher ISO, I actually found it was pretty decent, especially when I'm doing photography as well, which we'll talk about a little bit here in terms of the pros and cons, but when I'm using higher ISOs in photography, it looked great and there wasn't a lot of noisy images. And as well as because I used the GFX 100 Mark II so many times, I got used to kind of using that sensor and some of the lenses for it, and I wanted to buy one of my own, except I'm not made of money like that. Another thing Fuji cameras are known for is going to be the ability to use recipes or film sims inside of your camera so you can get images that look great without you having to do any editing. Now, I've been playing with this for a little while, and the 50R doesn't have Reala Ace on it. However, you are able to use a bunch of different recipes and variations of things so you have images that look great right out of camera. For me personally, when I'm doing some run and gun photography, when I'm not working with clients, sometimes I don't necessarily want to edit photos. That doesn't mean I don't like editing photos. I discovered Capture One on my computer and I'm having a lot of fun with it, but sometimes I don't have all the time to be able to do that. Or sometimes I get it really good in camera and editing it's gonna make it a little bit worse. So I just transfer it directly into my phone, which you can do with something from Angelbird, which I'm gonna talk about later. I'm gonna talk about that a little bit later. Also, just to keep things 100, I bought this used. I did not buy this new. You can't actually buy a 50R new, I don't think, anywhere. Now, I am going to leave some links in the description down below. They're not necessarily affiliate links, except for maybe the one on B&H, but this is not an easy camera to find because they just don't make them anymore. Fuji should probably make more of these. Also, well, that'd be a thing we'll talk about later too. I've been showing you a couple of photos I did when I did photo walks in Toronto. We're going to talk about doing photo walks in general. But one thing that I was told about Fuji GFX cameras is that they work really well in studio for portraiture, which is something that I used to do. And we're going to see how that holds up. All right, so we're doing our first portrait session on the GFX 50R. Now, one of the things I heard a lot about, especially when I was researching this camera, is that it's a little bit on the slower side and mostly works a lot better when you're using it in controlled environments. And while this is as controlled as anything else, the autofocus is definitely not Sony level. I found that if I used single point, it was really good, but even between shots, the focus would hunt around and try to find an autofocusing spot that wasn't on my subject, despite the fact that it's directly in the center of the frame and nothing else has changed. Now, if you're someone that likes to work a little bit slower, someone who doesn't like to take a ton of burst shots all in one go, this actually doesn't cause a lot of problems. In fact, even when I was doing photo walks, as long as I knew exactly what I wanted to capture, I could put my focus point there and everything would be fine, albeit the box would hunt a couple of times. But overall, in terms of autofocus for portraiture, I think this is a really good combination. As well as, even though the medium format on the GFX isn't necessarily a true medium format, there is a lot of separation between my subject and the background, even when I'm shooting at a 3.5. Now, one thing I want to do in the future is to use some faster lenses. The 3.5 is great, but even then it's still a little bit too slow for what I want to go for portrait work. And that caused me to go up in my ISO up to 1600, which might introduce a little bit of noise. But in the future, I do want to try some better portrait lenses that are a little bit faster, which I heard that Midicon actually makes a couple of them. All right, so instead of doing a fit check, we're going to do, well, a kit check and everything that I'm using on the GFX 50R. Now, obviously I have the body with this gigantic sensor, which also means I'm gonna have to use GF medium format lenses, which I am gonna be using the GF 50mm f3.5. It's small, it's compact, and it kind of makes it look and feel like an everyday carry because some of the Fuji lenses kind of protrude out a little bit, so this one actually works really well. Now, in terms of the handling for the GFX 50R, I wanted to make sure it fit my hand, so I added a small rig grip to it as well. It does have a wood finish, which kind of makes it look like more of a vintagey camera, but also this fits into my hand just fine, and it passes the pinky test because most cameras, even with a grip on it, doesn't actually clear my pinky. So this works really well. Now, the GFX does have 50 megapixel files, but I am gonna use two Angelbird 128GB cards, and I'm gonna make sure that the V90, even though this camera's a little bit slower, just having V90 cards are the fastest ones that I have. Also, we'll talk about Angelbird cards a little bit later. I am gonna be using a PG YTech strap on this guy as well. I typically don't have neck straps because they're really weird, but when I have one of these guys, I can kind of hold it kind of like a back sling, and whenever I need it, it has enough room that I can pull it up and I can take pictures whenever I'm on the go. Now, I am using a short stash everyday filter. This guy came out earlier on this year, and I did put it on the front of my 50mm to not only give a little bit of circular polarization while taking out some of the unwanted reflections, but as well as it does add a little bit of mist at the same time. So it does lift up your shadows. It does give kind of that pro mist look, but in a very subtle way. Also, while it takes down reflections, which means that some of the highlights aren't gonna look blown out, and added with the dynamic range of a sensor that's gonna be this big in photography, it's gonna make for a good portrait session. Okay, I'm just gonna interrupt the video for like maybe 60 seconds, but I wanna talk about our sponsor today, which is going to be Angelbird. They've been longtime supporters of the channel, even way back when I was using the FX6 a lot more, while providing one of the best CF Express Type A cards on the market, which they also made a lot faster and a lot better, and also for the exact same price. But that's not what I wanna talk about today. Now, when I had those CF Express A and Type B cards, I actually had to use a reader like this. And if I needed multiples, they were kind of clunky. I had to Velcro them together so I didn't lose any of them, and well, my friends kept making fun of me. Now, Angelbird has now come up with brand new readers for CF Express Type A, B, and SD cards. This is the PKT 4.0 reader from Angelbird. Now, the PKT reader does have different colors to coordinate for the different cards, but that's not the only thing about it. It's one, a lot smaller than what I used to use, but you could also use USB 4.0, which I didn't know existed until today. But that does give you up to 20 gigabytes per second in terms of your transfer speeds. Now, when you put one of your cards into here, it's actually super small, compact, and tiny. But what's also cool about this is that if you do connect a USB cable to this and you're using an iPhone 15, 16, or an Android with USB-C, this is enabled for that as well. So if I am shooting on a day and I don't have my computer around me and I want to take those Fuji JPEGs and put them directly on my phone, I'm able to do that using a PKT reader, which is a lot smaller, more compact than what I was using before. Now, if you are in the market for SD cards, maybe you've bought a new camera for the new year, I would recommend getting Angelbird cards. I've used them for a very long time and I swear by them and I use them all the time. And also, if you are somebody who likes to transfer things to your phone or you just want faster transfer speeds, try one of these guys out. I'll leave a link in the description down below, and if there's a discount code, it'll probably be on the screen, but let's get back into talking about the 50R. Now, I've had a phenomenal time while using this guy, and this is gonna be something that's in my everyday carry, albeit it's a big camera, but I'm a big person, so I need a bigger camera. I tried using the Fuji X100 a couple of times, and it felt like a baby toy that I was going to snap in half. So I opted for a camera that was a little bit bigger, but also I don't have GFX 100 type of money, and I also don't have the memory card space for it either. Now, there might be one glaring question I'm gonna see in the comments, and it's gonna be referring to a rumor that there's going to be a 100mm kind of rangefinder point and shoot GFX camera that's going to come out in 2025. Now, this kind of begs the question why I would buy this camera in the first place, but honestly, it's gonna go back to that price point of things. I can almost guarantee that that GFX rangefinder point and shoot camera is probably gonna cost about $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000. If you convert that into Canadian, that's like $1 million bucks. I was able to get this at a cheaper price than buying a ZVE1 body with no lens, no cards, or anything else, and I was able to get the body, the lens, the strap, and the grip for it at the same time. I don't know about you guys, but if you want a photo focus camera, I don't want to spend a ton of money doing it. Now, you obviously can get other cameras. The Nikon ZF is great, the A7C II is great for photography, but those are all cameras that don't fit my hands quite the way that I wanted to. But there was a little bit of a special sauce that came with using the medium format GFX camera. I had been using it for the better part of 2024, albeit I didn't say a word about it, and I got used to being able to use film recipes and do all the other things that made the images exactly the way that I wanted it to. Now, albeit the GFX lenses are going to cost quite a bit of money. There's not a lot of them that are available, but the ones that are, you're gonna look at a minimum of about $1,000, unless you're adapting vintage lenses. Which, if you're someone that needs a lot of lenses and you don't have a lot of money, this might not be the system you want to get into. However, for myself, I'm okay with building things a little bit slowly. I find that when I'm upgrading photography gear, I don't need a lot of stuff. Now, if I want to shoot faster moving objects or something like sports, this burst mode isn't great as well. But if I want to look into that, I would just carry another photography camera in my kit. So you want to keep in mind that this camera is going to be made for great image quality, but it is going to be a slower camera. You are going to have to slow down and think about your shots. However, once you get them, they look really, really, really good. Now, the weird question that I might see in the comments as well is, why are you making videos about photography cameras? I thought this was a filmmaking channel. I thought I was gonna learn more about being a better filmmaker. You still are, but I do think that there's about time where I start to actually practice some of the skills that I've taught. I've effectively taught you as much stuff as I can, unless I'm on the job and I'm looking at my own mistakes. But for the most part, in terms of technical skill, I've taught a lot about filmmaking, so I think it's time for me to execute it while talking about my interests and maybe teaching some of those skills back to you, which might be a lot more functional than me sitting at my desk and telling you how to use CineAI for the 14th time. I used to do photography a lot and it was a big part of my life, and also, to be honest with you, I was a lot more active and I was in better shape because I was going on photo walks on a daily basis, which I kind of threw away as a sacrifice to being a real filmmaker, which I've now realized I don't necessarily have to prove that to the internet, because if you're participating in it, you already are. Now, that's not to say anything about video production, filmmaking, cinematography is going to change that much. It just means there's gonna be more photo videos here too. I still have a lot of things I wanna say as a filmmaker, and learning and lighting and doing all the other stuff. There's a ton more videos on that Pixis that's on the shelf, and other cameras that might be in my possession that I'm under NDA for, and I'm not gonna tell you what they are because I'll get in trouble. But nonetheless, I wanted to add photography into this environment as well, because as creative people, it's a good way to depart from really kind of making sure the internet knows that you're a real cinematographer and having fun for once. Also, photos are really cool. That being said, this was my first impressions of the GFX 50R. This camera is gonna be my everyday carry, and it's probably here to stay, mostly because I'm selfish and I don't wanna give it to anybody anymore. But let me know which cameras you're going to 2025 with. A special shout out to Angelbird for sponsoring this video and supporting this channel. They gave me a lot of memory cards, and even though they didn't ask for it, I'm probably gonna mention them a lot throughout this year because they're great cards. But anyways, we'll talk to you in the next video, whenever I decide to make one. Peace.